Sakamoto was supposed to be involved in that as one of the partners in Calgary. I mean, I don't know why, but actually I can guess why. Why is our Premier here in Alberta not asking questions? We have a biomedical company that is involved in level 3 biolab experiments. I mean, was any of that material shipped over the border here into Alberta? Were any birds sold here in Alberta? These are questions I've asked the UBC and said, why isn't everybody asking these questions? I know the CFAA has to have a focus purely and simply on these birds. And the reality is, I don't want these birds to be culled immediately, even if that's a requirement and that's the end result. I would like to know the history of these birds, where they've been, where they've moved, what they've been injected with, what their current status is in relation to the stuff prior to this avian flu, and even the avian flu strain they've got, because apparently it is unique.
I was a molecular microbiologist, and I worked in a biosafety level 3 laboratory developing foreign animal disease diagnostic tests. Well, that's a lot of words. And basically, what we were developing those tests for was for bioagriterrorism. Bioagriterrorism is a very real threat in the U.S. We have very open croplands. We have very open livestock, cattle, poultry houses, and things like that. So we were studying the diseases to come up with vaccines, antidotes, and things like that. And the entire facility was a biosafety level 3, and what that means was that we had to have either Packers or we had N95s that we had to wear. It was a shower in, shower out facility. We had to shower in pairs. We couldn't bring our clothes in, so we had to wear clothes that were showered in, that were already in there, and then likewise coming back out, we had to leave those clothes, shower out, wash our eyes, spit, brush our teeth, blow our nose, and then put our clothes back on. And so there were a lot of really interesting and in somewhat sad experiments as well.
Am I being influenced by authority? Am I seeing authority or a good person? Because especially for the female brain, it's hardwired to respond to like male authority, like tribal leader status, and that bypasses a lot of your critical abilities. It's like, is this good for me? Is this the right thing to do? Should I be doing this? Authority trumps a lot of that. When you tell your kid, like, that doctor is your employee, you're in charge of the doctor, you tell the doctor what to do, you tell the doctor the problems, the doctor works for you. Recognize the difference between authority and perceived authority.
Hello, it's October 2025. Now, for over a decade now, I've talked about social conditioning, also known as social engineering. And a more common term now is Psyops. And I've discussed in depth the fraud that the liberal arts theoretical pseudoscience of psychology is. However, that is being used as a weapon against the people. And I've stated before many times, for example, when you look at this pseudoscience, how speculation of observation is not science. And the observation part is, for example, how human beings react. And this can make human beings predictable. Now, I've talked recently, for example, about the so-called convoy of freedom and the fake heroes, and how that was all a big psyop, and how it's come out now where there's American officials, even from the army, saying, yeah, they were controlling the whole event here in Canada from the USA. And I've talked about, for example, how we have the Western provinces being psyoped into wanting to leave Canada, either to become part of the United States or in some way become their own country. It's all a big psyop, but there's a lot more details that people really need to look into, especially the people in the western half of Canada. Take, for example, this firm called 19 to 0. The numbers 19, the word 2, and the word 0. And how they fairly recently, signed another contract with the Alberta government. So what, right? Well, this 19 to 0 deals with behavioral sciences. And behavioral sciences is part of psyops. And when you actually go through their website, they talk extensively how, just to paraphrase everything, how they manipulate people to, for example, to comply with, word crafting here, certain alleged cures, we'll say. And there's success with that. But you have to look at this even deeper, because the people in the Western provinces are being psyoped, and the Western provinces are contracted with this firm who deal with behavioral sciences. And everything's being presented to people to really get people worked up, riled up. And you can really see that in the comment section. Now, in today's world, we have, well, we all know there were what we called bots in the old days in comment sections, but now with AI, perceived people, fake accounts with this AI are leaving comments, really trying to support everything that's being done in the Western provinces. But people have to take note and really look into what's happening, not just in the Western provinces, but in Canada overall. Because everything is all tied together. And again, this is not just happening in Canada, this is happening in every single nation, country, worldwide, simultaneously. And not just these types of things, but we see, for example, how prices of everything are going up, people are making less money. Every single country have people coming into their country from other countries doing the same thing to them as their people leaving, going to other countries are doing. It's all done simultaneously. There's no, well, it's this government's fault, or they're doing this. I mean, no one's making these decisions, and I've talked about this extensively as well. But going back to what's going on in the western part of Canada, it's all a big psyop. Now, yes, these perceived elected officials like Deniella Smith will throw out things that people want to hear. For example, the federal government's not taking their guns. Whoa, that's really, wow, okay. People can get behind that. Now, I'm not stating or implying anything about guns. It doesn't matter, it's not the point, but every so often there has to be something that people truly want. And that kind of creates this whole smoke and mirrors of this dog and pony show, of this big psyop that's going on and trying to break up Canada and get everyone divided and everything else. Meanwhile, there's other things, bigger things going on, like jobs, where are the jobs going, who's not getting the jobs, the economy, everything else. But again, this is not just exclusive to Canada. But people should take note and look into 19 to 0 and follow the paper trail there. And this even ties in with this so-called ostrich farm and the whole controversy there. And I've showed, for example, extensively in overlays how that whole thing's a big psyop as well. Now, there's other things that people really need to look into, because people are really praising perceived elected officials, saying, yep, this is the right person, this person should be prime minister or whatever. Well, just a couple of really quick examples before I finish up here. What about the $13 billion of assets that were taken away from Alberta Health Services? Where did those assets go? Look into that. And that's got to tell you something, what's going on. $13 billion of assets, which includes hospitals and everything else, transferred over to, and I'll leave that for you to look into. And then we also have, for example, how there's been a contract signed with a biolab located in Calgary dealing with highly infectious pathogens, and their ties with, for example, to the so-called ostrich farm in British Columbia. And no one's questioning anything, because they're programmed not to. And they're taking the bait with things like, for example, this, they're not taking away my guns, as if the guns that are available to people are worth anything against an army, we'll say. I did a video several years ago about all that and the absurdity behind all that. So I wanted to give you some things to think about when it comes to what's happening in Canada, for example. And again, I'm going to highlight, this is not just happening in Canada, this is happening worldwide. Look into the firm 19 to 0. Look into this biolab company in Calgary, and look into where 13 or over $13 billion of Alberta Health Services assets went to. And I'm just going to segue for a moment. Alberta Health Services was funding 60% of the nonprofit organization that was sexually abusing, trafficking these vulnerable women, and not this nonprofit mental health organization where I had worked. So it's not like I'm defending Alberta Health Services. And again, this is not to state or imply that everyone across the board knew about it. But you really don't need that. You just need a few, as we'll say as a descriptive, important people to know. Anyway, things to think about. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
90% of my firearms because I became a criminal overnight with an unjust gun grab fraud. I know that Premier Smith is familiar with the homeowner in Ontario who was just charged with injuring a home intruder who had a crossbow.
You should ask her about it.
Canadians are being charged for protecting themselves, their families, and their property, and being backed into a corner through submission by the federal government, where we're being told to leave our keys beside our unlocked door, as criminals have more rights than we do. So where would the Alberta Police Force stand in relation to illegal firearm owners?
It's a great question. I'm glad we ended on that. And I'm sorry to those of you still lining up. I did say that was it.
and I see a rectangle, and you're looking at a light shining from a different angle, and you say, I see a circle. What I say is true. What you said was true. The soup can is the truth. One of the things that we looked into is, does an idea have to be suppressed for my idea to flourish? And if that's true, then I am not telling the truth. I'm engaging in propagandizing and psychological warfare, psychological operations. So if I have to make people say things, or I have to suppress other ideas, then my idea sucks.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.